Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a lesson on managing Active Directory objects. In this lesson, we are going to talk about moving objects, deleting objects, and then we'll get into the actual management of users, groups, and computers. First, let's talk about moving objects in Active Directory. There are three ways, or quite honestly, there are probably more than three ways, but there's three main ways to move objects from one location in the Active Directory database to another, or as I have here, from one container to another. So as a for instance, maybe moving a user from one organizational unit to another organizational unit. Now the three main ways of doing this, first of all, would be simply drag and drop. That would be the first way. Okay, you just click on the object in one location and drag it and drop it in the other location where you want to move it to. A second way that we can do this is through the use of the context menu, where you would right click on the object and select to move it and then enter where you would like to move it to. The third way would be from the command line with a new command. Now we've previously learned about the ds add command. Well, now we have the ds move command. Now in just a few minutes, we're going to go into the actual operating system and I'll show you exactly how to get objects moved from one location to another. But one thing I want you to keep in mind is that when an object is moved, it can definitely change the way your systems work. One of the most obvious examples I can give you is something called group policy. Now, we haven't gotten into group policy yet in this course. That's coming up here real soon. But group policy is a set of rules surrounding how a user's computer will act. Okay? It's rules about what they can see, what they can't see, what they can do, and what they cannot do. Well, if you were to move a user or a computer from one organizational unit to another, and you have one group policy on the one container and a different group policy on the other container, well, now that user or computer that you've moved is going to get the new set of rules from the new group policy associated with the new container. Now, I know that might not make complete sense right now because we haven't gone over group policy, but I just want you to understand that when you move things around, if you remember, we talked about organizational units and the hierarchy, and those organizational units, besides just making things look organized, they also have to do with the delegation of administrative control and group policy application. Well, when you move those organizational units around or move objects from one to another, you change how that stuff all works. So you don't want to move things on a whim. You want to have a strategy when moving objects from one place to another. Now, when it comes to deleting objects, there are, again, three main ways to delete an object. One way would be to, well, it says hitting delete on the keyboard. You'd have to highlight. You'd have to click on the object first to highlight it, and then you could hit delete on the keyboard. Second way would be to use the context menu. So again, you would right click on the object and then select delete. And the third way would be another command line tool, which is called DSRM, and the RM stands for remove. Whereas we've learned about DS add. Add is for adding objects. In the last slide, I talked about DS move, and that's for moving objects. Well, here's DSRM. RM is for remove or deleting an object. Now, when it comes to deleting objects, you really need to pay attention. As much as moving objects might have some dramatic effects on changes in the way systems function, well, deleting objects can get really crazy if you're not careful. Because one thing you need to keep in mind is that every object in the Active Directory database has its own unique SID. Now, SID stands for Security Identifier. If you delete an object and then let's say recreate the same object with the same name, it's not the same object. It is a new object with a new SID, and it will not be treated like the old object. Okay, the security identifier is what makes an object truly unique within the database. So as a for instance, if you had a user account, and let's say that user was a member of a number of different groups and had a number of different rights and permissions as a result of being a member of those groups. And then you delete that user and you think to yourself, oh, shoot, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to get rid of that user. And that user still actually works for the company. Or maybe that user did leave the company, but then changed their mind and came back. Or, there's many different reasons this might happen. Well, if you were to create another user account with the same username, it's not the same user. That account will not have the same group membership. It will not have the same rights and permissions or anything else that might have been associated with that user account is now different. Okay, so I really want you to keep in mind that once you delete an object, that object is gone. Now, later on in this course, we'll talk about backup and recovery, and we'll talk about things you can do if you were to delete an object and you want to recover it. But in general, once you delete an object, it's gone. You cannot recreate another object with the same name and expect to have the same object. Now, one really nice thing is, a few lessons ago, I talked to you about checking a box for accidental deletion of an organizational unit. Okay, when you create an organizational unit, you get prompted with a checkbox to prevent from accidental deletion. Well, guess what? You can protect pretty much any object in Active Directory from accidental deletion. You just have to work a little harder to do it because you're not prompted during the creation of that object. So why don't we go ahead and jump into the actual operating system, go into Active Directory, and I'm going to show you how to move objects, how to delete objects, and then I'll also, and this may be the most important part, is show you how to go into different objects and prevent accidental deletion. Okay, so here I am on my Windows 7 client computer, and I'll tell you what, the reason I want us to go to the Windows 7 client is because, as I've mentioned in previous lessons, I really want you to get used to the fact that you're not always going to be running to the physical server in order to manage it. And in the last lesson, we went ahead and connected via remote desktop to New York DC1. But this time, let's go ahead and use another form of remote management. I'm going to go ahead and click on Start, go to Administrative Tools, and here I'll find Active Directory Users and Computers. And the reason that I find this here is because we had already installed the Remote Server Administration Tools and included the Active Directory Domain Services Management Tools. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And even though I'm on a client, I'm not on a domain controller, I can still go ahead and look at Active Directory. Okay, and we have it right here. Now, the first thing I want to show you in Active Directory is how to move objects. So the first way that you can move an object would be to drag and drop that object. So as a for instance, if I come down here to the New York container, and then I'm going to expand that, and here I have my New York users. Well, let's say one of these users is moving from New York, and you know what? We're going to say that they've moved to Chicago. Okay, so let's go ahead and say that there's a Chicago container that is part of the globalmantics.local domain, and we're going to do that by right-clicking, New Organizational Unit, and we'll say Chicago. And we're going to actually not protect this container from accidental deletion. And the reason why is because when we're done, we're going to actually delete this container. This is just so that we can demonstrate this. I'm going to click OK. And inside Chicago, we'll even go a step further and create another organizational unit and call it Chicago Users. And again, don't protect it. Click OK. All right, so here we have our New York users. And if we want to say that, you know what, There's another thing I want to show you. See here how we're just seeing first initial, last name, first initial, last name? Well, you know what? I don't know who A Bout is or A Carpenter is. If I double click on this and I actually go in here, you'll see it's Angela Carpenter. Okay, that's a little bit easier to see as opposed to just A Carpenter. So what I want to do is I'm going to come up here to the View menu, and I'm going to go to Add Remove Columns. And I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to select first name, add that in, last name, add that in, click OK. And you'll notice it reset the whole thing. So let me just go ahead and expand New York and the New York users. And now we can actually see not just first initial, last name, but we can see the actual name of the person. So let me go ahead and expand Chicago so that we can see the Chicago users container. And speaking of Angela Carpenter, we're going to say that Angela has moved from New York and now she's working in our Chicago office. Well, all I have to do is just click on this user and drag it over to the Chicago users container. And here you get a warning saying, hey, when you move an object, and look, this will look very similar to what I was just telling you. This can prevent your existing system from working the way it was originally designed. For example, moving an organization unit can affect the way group policies are applied to accounts within the OU. So even Microsoft is using the exact same example I'm using as to why you want to be careful when moving objects. So it's asking me, are you sure you want to do this? And yes, I am sure. I'm going to actually check the box saying, I know what I'm doing. Don't warn me about this anymore. That would be personal preference, up to you if you want to always be warned. Might not be a bad idea to always be warned. I mean, unless you're moving things a lot, and then you don't want this warning to come up. So I'm going to say don't bother me, and I'll click yes. And you'll see that A Carpenter or Angela Carpenter is now gone. And where did she go? Well, if I click over here to the Chicago users, there she is. But you know what? She's not the only user that has been relocated to Chicago. If I come back here to my New York users, we're going to say that Anthony Gomez has also been relocated to Chicago. So I could click and drag just like I did with Angela, but I'm not going to. I'm going to show you another way of doing it. I'm going to right click, which pulls up the context menu, and select Move. When I select Move, it asks me, well, where do you want to move it to? So I will expand Chicago, highlight Chicago users, click OK. You'll notice that Anthony Gomez is gone. And if I come over here to Chicago users, look at that. Now I've got Angela Carpenter and Anthony Gomez both in Chicago. Now, before I get to the third method of moving an object, which would be the command line, I want to show you one other thing. If we go over here to New York users, one of the nice features of drag and drop or the context menu is that you can select multiple users. So let's say that a whole group of users, like that whole group that I've just highlighted, all got moved to Chicago. Now, just so you know, the way I highlighted that whole group was I clicked one of them, and then I held down the Shift key on the keyboard, clicked another one, highlights everything in between. But I don't know that the odds are very strong that all of these A's in a row are all the ones that got moved to Chicago. What's more likely the case is that we'll say Amanda Cole, and we'll say that Ann Hines and Ashley Reese have all also been moved to Chicago. Aha, look at that. I highlighted 3 of them, but without everything in between. The way I did that was by holding down the Control key on the keyboard. Well, what's nice about this is I could either right-click on any one of them, and it will move all 3 of them, which let me do that right now. Move Chicago users. Click OK. Come over here. You'll notice now there's 5 in here because I just moved 3 more. Or let me just go ahead and click a few more people. I could just literally click on one of them and drag and drop. All 3 of them, again, have been moved. And now I have a whole bunch of users sitting in the Chicago users container because they've all been relocated to Chicago. Okay, so that's one of the nice things about drag and drop or the context menu. Now, let's go ahead and see how this would be done from the command prompt. Let's go over here to New York users and let's pick somebody. Let's say right here, Angela Fry. Okay, that's who we're going to pick on. That's who's going to move to Chicago via the command prompt. I'm going to click Start. In the Search Programs and Files, in the Search Programs and Files window here, I'm going to just type CMD and hit Enter. That brings me into a command prompt. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to type DS move. And I'm just going to hit Enter. And you'll notice that it takes me into the help, which explains exactly how DS move would work. And you'll notice there's quite a bit of syntax here. But the main thing is that you're going to say DS move, the object's distinguished name. Okay, so we're going to go to the LDAP distinguished name for the existing object. Then we're going to jump over here to this little dash new parent, or actually I could even say up here in the syntax example, DS move, object name, new parent, and then give the parent distinguished name of where you're moving it to. The one thing I would like to point out is you'll notice that we're not classifying what type of object we're moving. We don't have to say DS move user or DS move computer or DS move OU. We just put in the distinguished name because in that distinguished name, well, it's a unique object. We don't need to say what type of object it is. So for this example, let me go ahead and move this down a little bit. That way we can see right here, here's our A Fry account. I'm going to go ahead and let me type CLS just to clear that screen out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type in DS move space, and in quotes, we always want to put the distinguished name in quotes. We're going to put CN equals A Fry, okay, because that's the actual common name of this account, comma, OU equals, now we need to start with the OU that this account's actually in, and that would be New York users. So that would be New York users, comma. Now, is New York users at the root of the domain? No. There is a parent OU, and that's New York. So we're now going to type in OU equals New York, comma. Is New York at the root of the domain? Yes, it's in the root of the domain. So now we're going to go to the domain components, which would be DC equals Globomantics, comma, okay, again, big mistake people make, they put .local. That would be wrong. You want to put comma, DC equals local. Space, oh, wait, before the space, let me back it up. Quotes, okay, you got to put the entire distinguished name in quotes, space, dash, new parent, okay, because we're going to move this object to a new parent location, space, and again in quotes, we want to put the LDAP distinguished name for Chicago users. So that would be OU equals Chicago users, comma. Now because there is a parent OU, we're going to put in OU equals Chicago, comma. Because Chicago's in the root of the domain, here's globomantics.local, so DC equals globomantics, not dot, see I almost made that mistake, comma, DC equals local, end quotes. Now if I've typed this all correctly, what should happen is it should successfully move. So let me hit enter and let's see what happens. DS move succeeded. This account has left New York users and has gone to Chicago users. Now, how do we know this? Well, let's come back over here to Active Directory, Users and Computers, and you might say to yourself, why is Angela Fry still sitting in New York users? Well, that's because we haven't refreshed the screen. So let me go ahead and hit F5. Or actually, you know what? Because I'm on here, I can't hit F5. Let me highlight the container. Now I can hit F5. Or, of course, you can also hit this icon right there. And now we can see that Angela Fry is gone. Okay. Well, where'd she go? Well, let's click over here on Chicago users. There she is. Angela Fry is now in Chicago. Now, one thing I will tell you, I have experienced this, so in case you just had this happen to you, if you don't see Angela Fry in Chicago users, make sure you hit refresh again. Okay, sometimes if you refresh on a specific container like we did with New York users, it doesn't refresh the entire database. There's a little bit of a delay. So just a little heads up. I have experienced that, and I don't want you to get confused if you don't see Angela Fry. If you don't, go ahead and hit refresh. Once highlighted on Chicago users, and there she will be. So that's pretty much how you move objects. Now what I want to do is go ahead and let's go ahead and click on the first one here, highlight all the way down to the last one, and let's click and drag them all back over into New York. And then I'm going to come over here, highlight Chicago, and I'm going to show you now how to delete objects. Okay? Because we don't need the Chicago or the Chicago users container anymore. We only put that there for demonstration purposes. There is a Chicago office to the Global Mantics Corporation, but as you will see in a later lesson, that office actually has a separate domain that it is a part of. Okay, it's not part of the actual globalmantics.local domain. So, how can we delete an object? Well, here we have the Chicago users container. I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to hit delete on the keyboard. Are you sure you want to delete the organization unit named Chicago users? Now, this is not what happens with the preventing accidental deletion. Okay, if we enabled the prevention of accidental deletion, we would still get this message, but when we click yes, which I'm going to click now, instead of that happening, meaning it actually got deleted, it would say that I can't delete it. I would have to go an extra step, which I'll show you in just a few moments, in order to delete it if we were preventing accidental deletion. You'll always get the warning message. Okay, that's been around since forever, and it'll probably continue to be around since as far out as you can imagine. Now, a second way you can delete an object would be to go ahead and right-click on the object and select Delete. And again, are you sure you want to do this? Yes, I am. The Chicago container is now gone. Now, before we go into the command line, I want to show you something. Here I have my New York users. And let's pick on somebody new. Let's go to Amanda Long. I'm going to go into Amanda Long's account here, and I'm going to go to the Member Of tab. Now, I will tell you, I'm actually jumping ahead just a little bit here. This is something we're going to cover in more detail later on in this same lesson. But what we want to do is I want to show you that this user is a member of the domain users, but I'm going to also add to that. I'm going to say that this user is also a member of, and I'm going to put in sales, check names. Okay, there's sales. And you know what? Let's go a step further, and let's say that this user happens to be, now I'm going to put domain A, and there's domain admins. Okay, so this user is a member of domain admins, domain users, and sales. And I'm going to click OK. Okay, Amanda Long, A Long. I want you to remember all of that, okay? Because what we're going to do here is I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to delete Amanda Long. Yep, bye-bye. Oh, wait a minute. What are you telling me? Amanda has not left the company? Oh, okay, no problem. I'll just right-click on New York users. New user, Amanda Long, A Long, right? That was the login name. That was the name of the user. Next, put in a password for this user. We'll even put in the same password that she had before, which we know what it is because we entered this user through my batch file that we used in a previous lesson, and in that batch file we saw the password. And we'll say that she's going to need to change her password in next login. Click next and finish. And oh, look at that. We can already see that there's one difference. Amanda Long. Oh, okay, wait a minute. Let me go ahead and change that. That's right here. The actual display name should be A Long. Okay. And let me go ahead and refresh. Oh, cancel. All right. That's interesting. Still Amanda Long. Why can't we get this to change? And you see it's already acting differently? I know. Let's look at the Member Of tab. Hey, wait a minute. She's only a member of domain users now. But this is the same user, isn't it? No. It's not the same user. And I hope as you were listening to me do that, you were catching how obvious I was being and being ridiculously stupid in the way that I was pretending like, wait a minute, why isn't this stuff working? That's what happens when you delete an object. If you recreate or you attempt to recreate the same object the same way, matter of fact, I'll tell you what, let's delete Amanda Long. Let's even go a step further here. Let me click yes. I am going to, now I need to go ahead and let me minimize Active Directory here. I'm going to go ahead and connect into New York DC1. This I have to actually go over to the server. Let's come over here and let's go to Start, Computer, go to the C drive. Here's that create 500 users batch file. Let's go in and edit that file. Let's make sure we get the right one. Amanda Long. Yeah, Amanda Long. Edit, copy, close, right click, edit, paste. Okay, there we go. Amanda Long. Hit enter. Amanda Long has been created. Let me close this. I'm actually going to leave New York DC1. And I'll come back here to my Windows 7 client, go back here into Active Directory, highlight New York users, refresh, and what do we have? Here's A Long, right? Displaying the right way, Amanda Long. But if we go in, what's still different? Not a member of those groups anymore. Guess what's going to happen? Amanda's going to be calling you because she's going to try to do something that was only accessible because she was a member of the sales group or maybe because she was a domain administrator, and she's not anymore. Okay? So once you delete an object, that object is gone. Recreating an object with the same name is not the same object. Now, let's go over to our command prompt. Let's say we really do want Amanda Long to be deleted, okay? As it turns out, she really did leave the company. All right, well, then let's go ahead and type in DSRM. And again, if I just hit enter, you'll get the help for this. Let me scroll back up here. And you'll see with the syntax, it's just simply DSRM and the object distinguish name. Now, one really cool thing, but dangerous thing at the same time, is this dash no prompt switch. No prompt goes into silent mode. Do not prompt for delete confirmation. Okay, so what that means is if I type DSRM, and in this case, we're just going to go ahead and put in some quotes, and I'm going to put in CN equals A long, comma, OU equals New York space users, comma, OU equals New York, comma, DC equals Globomantics, not dot. See, everyone, that is such a common mistake. Even though I'm teaching this and I'm trying to tell you not to do it, I keep almost putting dot local because it's just habit, comma, DC equals local, end quote. And I'm going to leave it at that, just so I can show you if I hit enter, it's asking me, it says, are you sure? So you don't get that GUI, that little message that pops up. It's just right here in the command prompt. Are you sure you want to do this? Well, let's say no. I'm going to say, no, I'm not sure. And you'll notice that if I come back over here, even if I refresh, you'll see here that A long is still there. So this time, I'm going to hit up arrow. I have that same DSRM command, but this time I'm going to put space dash no prompt. And I'm going to hit enter. And look at that. I've just deleted an object without any warning. DSRM succeeded. If I come back over here to New York users and I hit refresh, A long is gone. So that is how you delete an Active Directory object. You can either highlight it and hit delete on the keyboard. You can right click and select delete, or use the DSRM command. Now, one other thing I do want to show you real quick before we talk about managing users, and that is, I told you before, or you've seen before, that when you create an OU, so let me just go ahead and right click, new organizational unit, you kind of get that checkbox that's already there, protect container from accidental deletion. But when you right click to create a new user, you don't see that, right? If I say test user, tuser, click next, all right, and put in a password. Next, finish. Okay, I didn't have that. But if I come down here to my test user account, now what I need to do is go into the properties. When I'm in the properties, I'm looking for a tab that doesn't exist. I'm looking for the object tab. Well, that object tab is not there by default. In order to get that object tab to appear, I need to go up to the view menu and go to advanced features. And as we've seen before, that adds a bunch of stuff to Active Directory. So I'm going to go ahead and expand and go back into my New York users and go ahead and scroll down here to our test user. And this time go into the properties. And now we have an object tab. On that object tab, there is a checkbox to protect this object from accidental deletion. If I check the box and click OK, and now I go ahead and highlight the user and hit delete on the keyboard. Are you sure? Yes? Can't do it. If I right click and I say delete, are you sure? Yes? Can't do it. And yes, it's true that even if I were to go ahead and, you know what, let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and DSRM. The only thing I'm going to change here, it's everything's the same except for instead of a long, this is going to be to user. Or I'm sorry, it's not to user, it's actually test user. So let me go ahead and put that in. Test user. DSRM failed. Access is denied. Okay, so even from the command prompt and even with the -no prompt switch, you know that dangerous switch that takes away the prompt, you are protected. So that is one thing that you may want to keep in mind is you may want to go ahead and protect your accounts from accidental deletion. But that is something that you would need to decide based upon exactly how things are working on your network. Now, I do actually want test user gone. So what I need to do is I need to go into the properties, still viewing the advanced features, right? So making sure advanced features are still there. If I go into the properties of test user, go to the object tab, clear that box, click OK, then right click, delete. Am I sure? Yes. And boom, that account is gone. All right, that's how you move and delete objects. Let's talk just real briefly about user management. All right, when it comes to managing our users, there's a number of different things that I'm going to walk you through and show you here real fast. We're gonna pop actually right back over to the operating system, look at Active Directory, and I'm gonna show you that the user accounts have a great number of attributes. I'm going to show you how to do a password reset. This is a very common thing that you have to do for your users. It never seems to fail. If a user goes on vacation for a week, I don't know what they do on vacation, but when they come back, they cannot remember their password. So very often they'll call in and say, hey, need my password reset. So I'll show you how to do that. I'll show you how to unlock a user account that has been locked out. Now, how does an account get locked out? Well, when that user came back from vacation and forgot their password, rather than just calling up and saying, hey, I forgot my password, very often what they'll do is they'll try to remember it. So they'll try to log in using whatever password they thought it was. And when they've done enough invalid attempts at logging in with the wrong password, and this is something that is subject to a group policy setting. Again, getting into something we're going to talk about later. But with these group policy settings, you can say after X number of invalid login attempts, lock the account. That protects against somebody just sitting and password guessing on somebody's account. So I'll show you how to unlock a user's account. I will show you how to disable or enable user accounts. So in that example we were just talking about with Amanda Long, when she left the company and it was like, oh, wait, no, she didn't leave the company. Oh, yes, she did. Well, rather than immediately deleting an account when somebody leaves the company, it's good common practice to disable their account, which prevents that account from being used, but it's still there. And that way, if that user were to come back, you truly can re-enable the account, and that would be the same account. It's the same account, same object, same SID, same everything. So those group membership attributes that we lost, well, we'll still have them. Also, if you have somebody who, let's say, is going away on a leave, okay, so they're not actually leaving the company, they're just out on leave. They're going to be gone for 6 weeks. Well, you may want to have that account protected for those 6 weeks, but rather than delete it so it can't be used, you just disable it. I'm also going to show you a little bit more when it comes to command line management. We've learned so far about DS add, DS move, and DS RM for remove. Well, now I'm going to show you 3 other commands called DS get, which is where you can get or find out certain attributes about an object. I'll show you DS mod, which is for modifying the attributes of an object, and DS query, which is where you can return certain objects based upon search criteria. And then the last thing I will show you is how to copy a user account. And this is something that does come in handy if you either A, want to create what's called a user template, which would be an example of a template might be if you have a template for, let's say, a customer service user, right? You think of a department where you have a lot of users that all have the same needs within the organization. You may want to create a template, which is just a user account, and you may name that user account template customer service user. And when you set up certain properties for that user, those properties will go ahead and be copied over as well with the template. Okay, and I will tell you, it's not the entire user account. I mean, there are certain things that have to be unique with each user account, but other things will copy over. And I'll tell you, the most important property that copies over, I'm not really worried about having you memorize which properties will be copied over. The member of property copies over, meaning whatever groups a user belongs to, that group membership will copy over. So let's go ahead and pop back over to our Windows 7 client. And remember, we're using that to manage Active Directory right now. So we'll pop back over to that client and see how to manage our user accounts. So here we are back on our Windows 7 client, and we're still looking at Active Directory, looking at the New York users container. And if I were to take one of my user accounts here, so we'll say Tommy Houston, I'm going to go ahead and double click on this account. Now I can either right click and select properties, or I can double click. Either way, it opens up the property sheet. And you'll notice that there are a lot of properties. Now there's a lot more right now than there typically would be because we have our advanced features enabled. Let me just show you. Let's count how many tabs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 tabs. Let me hit cancel, view. Let's not look at advanced features. Go back into our New York users, and just to pick on the same one, let's go ahead and go to Tommy Houston. Oop. Now you'll notice I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tabs. So 5 of the tabs have gone away. And the reason why is because those are considered to be advanced options. And you know what? I'm not going to worry about those for right now. We can leave those out. We will visit some of those tabs later on in the course as we come across a lesson that pertains to that information. But let's stick to the basic stuff right now. On the General tab, what do we have? Well, our general information. First name, middle initial, last name, display name, description, office, telephone number, email, web page. On the address tab, well, it's just that, the actual address for this person. And by the way, if you're thinking, why do I need all this stuff? Well, all this stuff is what makes it that now you can have a single database, your Active Directory database, that can be used not only by IT management, but by HR management as well. Okay, so instead of having to have a separate HR database for every user, you just have a single database, and the HR information is in here as well. Now, the Account tab is a very important tab. This is where it shows the user logon name, which you'll notice is blank. And the reason it's blank is because we created this user with a script, and I didn't do a really good job with that script. I let this field out. Okay, so there should be a user logon name there, typically. You'll notice I put the pre-Windows 2000 logon name. It's T Houston, but we're not going to worry about that for right now because we're not worried about trying to log in. We'll worry about that later. For right now, I just want you to see what's here. Here's a couple of buttons on this tab, which come in real handy. Here's logon hours, which control when a user can log on. If you know that Tommy's only supposed to be here at certain times, certain days, you could go ahead and put login denied for, let's say Tommy should never be there on Sunday. Well, we can go ahead and make it that Tommy can't log in on Sunday. And log on to, this is where you can determine what computers Tommy can use. Maybe Tommy is only allowed to use New York Client 2 Wins 7. Okay, maybe that's the only computer Tommy is allowed to be logging into. If Tommy tries logging in from somewhere else, Tommy's maybe up to something. Okay, so that's something we could do there. This, by the way, is where you would unlock the account if the account was locked. Okay, so if we needed to unlock this account, we would unlock it right here. You'll notice that the user must change password at next logon. That's the way it was set when we created this account. We could change that here. We could also make it that a user can't change their password or their password never expires. Here's storing a password using reversible encryption, which has to do with hashing, something we're not going to get into right now. You'll notice the account is currently disabled. Yes, it's true. When I created those 500 users, I created them with them all disabled. So the first thing a user will have to do when they start their first day on the job is they have to call Help Desk. And Help Desk would have to do exactly what we're doing right now. Go to the Account tab of the user properties and just clear that box. And then the account is no longer disabled. I'm going to show you another way to do that. Okay, not yet though. Show you in just a little bit. And then there's some more stuff here, and we're not going to get into that right now. Some more Kerberos related settings. Here's where we can put an expiration date. If we know that Tommy is a temporary employee and is only going to be working here until a certain date in the future, we can go ahead and set that date up here. And the account will go ahead and automatically disable itself after that date and time. On the Profile tab, this is where you can go ahead and you can set up something called roaming user profiles. Okay, something again we're not going to get into right now. Matter of fact, we really don't even touch on that in this course. But roaming user profiles is where a user's profile, which contains like their environment type information, will be stored in a central location, and then any computer they log into around the network, they would pull their profile from that central location. You can also set up what's called a home folder for individual files and folders. Now, this is kind of a thing from the past. These days, we do what's called folder redirection on the My Documents folder, which is something that we will learn later on in this course. The Telephones tab is where we have telephone numbers. Organization tab is where we can say what their title, department, and company is and who their manager is. The Member Of tab, a very important tab we just saw a little while ago, where we determine what groups a user is a member of. And then we have the Com Plus. This is interesting. The Com Plus tab, as far as I'm concerned, should probably be part of the advanced tabs because this is not something that the average administrator will be dealing with. So we're not going to worry about that for right now. Okay, so that, let me go ahead and cancel out of here. That is, any number of user attributes that we may want to modify as part of user management. Now, another thing that we do very often with our user accounts is reset their password. Resetting their password, you'll notice, was not an option anywhere in any of those property sheets. And even if I were to click advanced features, you still wouldn't find it there. That's a problem that a lot of IT administrators run into. They come in here and they think, oh, okay, I'm going to reset a user's password. Oh, there's Tommy. He forgot his password. Let me go in here. And then they go looking for password reset. It doesn't exist. You have to right click on the user and select to reset password. Click on that. Go ahead and type in the new password that you're going to give to Tommy. Decide whether Tommy needs to change password at next logon, which, by the way, usually you do want to check that box. That's why it's checked by default, meaning you shouldn't know your user's passwords. Only the user should know the user's password. So if you're going to type something in, unless they're sitting with you and you tell them to go ahead and type it in themselves, you type in a temporary password like that temp1234 that we did in a previous lesson, and then make it that the user must change password the first time they log in. Also, we could choose to unlock the user's account if they call you and say, hey, I forgot my password. Oh, and I think I locked my account out. Okay? So you can do both of those in one shot. So click OK. Password has been changed. And that's how you reset password. As far as unlocking the account, well, I already pretty much just showed you. You can either go into reset password and then included in there is unlocking the account, or you go into the properties for the user and on the account tab, you can unlock the account. As far as enabling or disabling a user account, well, right now you'll notice the little down arrow. That means this account is currently disabled. So let me right click, and since it's currently disabled, I have an option to enable. So I click that. Tommy Houston is now enabled. That little down arrow is gone. Since this is a currently enabled account, if I right click, you'll notice enable account is not an option. Disable account is an option. So I disable the account, and now the account has been disabled. The other way, of course, you could do this is by going into the properties, go to the account tab, scroll down here, and then there's a checkbox for either the account being disabled or clearing the box to make it enabled. See, if I clear that box and click OK, you'll notice the arrow goes away. The account is now enabled. Now, before we jump over to the command prompt, let me show you how to copy an account. Now, I mentioned one example of why you might copy an account is if you set up a template. Okay, and I will tell you, there is no actual literal template. That's a misconception. A lot of books talk about creating a template. If I right click here, you'll notice there's no new template. Okay, a template would just be creating a user account, and maybe you call this account, and I'm going to call it _ template user. Temp user. Next, put in password. Next, finish. And I would actually, you know what else I should do? I should disable that template user account. You want to know why I put the underscore, by the way? The underscore makes it appear at the beginning of the list. Instead of having to go down to the T's to find our templates, it's right here at the top, template user. And really, I probably should have said template customer service user, or template sales user, or template IT user. Okay. But another way that we may copy accounts instead of using an actual template is, well, let's go back down to the T's and let's go back down to Tommy Houston. Maybe Tommy works in the sales department, let's say. And we've now hired a new employee who is going to work in sales and is going to do exactly what Tommy does. Then we might want to just say, well, since this user is going to do what Tommy does, let's just right click on Tommy and copy Tommy's account. Now, before we actually do this, a couple things. One, copying an existing user account can be dangerous. See, Tommy's been with the company for 14 years. And during the course of those 14 years, well, Tommy, besides working in sales, well, he's proven to be very versatile, and he has been asked to perform a number of other tasks, filling in other departments. And as part of performing those tasks, he maybe was made a member of additional groups and has been given additional privileges that a typical salesperson wouldn't have. If I hire a new employee, that new employee is only supposed to have the basic permissions of your typical sales user, not necessarily everything that Tommy has because he's been with the company for 14 years. Okay, and that's the reason why it's better practice to use a template user if you're going to be copying user accounts. The other thing before we copy this account is, well, let's make something to be copied. In other words, we have the account, it's just a generic account. Let's go to the member of tab, and let's say that Tommy is a member of, check names, domain admins, and is a member of sales. Okay, click OK. Now I'm going to right click on Tommy, copy, test user, T user, next. Still have to put in a password. You might be thinking to yourself at this point, wait a minute, this sure seems exactly like creating an account from scratch. You're right, it is. I mean, in the sense that you still had to fill all this out. You still had to fill all this out. Next. Oh, by the way, you'll notice that the account is disabled. You know why? Because Tommy was disabled. So that box was checked by default. We could uncheck it, but it's checked by default because Tommy's account was disabled. Click next and finish. Here's the difference. The difference with this test user, as opposed to if we just created it manually, is that if I go into the test user account properties and go to the member of tab, look at how test user is already the member of domain admins, domain users, and sales. Okay, so that's the benefit in copying an account as opposed to creating the account from scratch. Okay, so let's go ahead and cancel out of here. Let's delete our test user. Yes. Let's go ahead and let's go back up to the top of the list here. And let's delete our template user. And yes. All right. Got rid of the extra stuff that we've thrown in there. And one last thing before we go to the command prompt is, let's go back to the T's. Let's say Tommy is leaving the company. And we're now hiring a new user to take Tommy's place. Well, one thing we could do is we could create a new user account for that new user and then set it up manually. Or we could make a copy of Tommy's account for that new user and then when Tommy leaves, just disable Tommy's account. But if you are completely positive that Tommy is definitely leaving and another user is definitely taking his place, what you can do is you can actually go in and rename an account. Okay, we can not only rename it here, so we could say, oh, T Houston is now going to be T user. But we could also, you'll notice as soon as I do that, this came up automatically and say, oh, wait a minute, you might want to change some other things. Yeah, it's not Tommy anymore, it's test. And it's not Houston, it's user. And the user logon name is also going to be T user. And click OK. All right, so you'll see here that now that information has been changed. Okay, so that is another way that we could go ahead and get somebody else to have all the group membership and privileges that Tommy once had. Now we don't want test user. Test user doesn't actually exist. So let's go ahead and rename this back. We're going to say that it's T Houston. And as soon as I go to click away, we need to go ahead and make this Tommy Houston. It's going to be, actually, you may recall Tommy didn't have a user login name, but as long as we're doing this, I'm going to go ahead and put it in. And technically, this I should also select globalmantics.local. I didn't do that before. Good idea, though. Click OK. And now we've restored everything back. All right, let's go over to our command prompt and do some stuff with that. So come down here. You notice we still have the command prompt open. And let's go ahead and type CLS just to clear that screen out. Just get all that other garbage out of the way. And now I'm going to go ahead and type in DS mod, and if I hit enter, it gives you, of course, the help for DS mod. Scroll up here. And one main thing I want to show you here is notice that with DS mod, you do have to say the type of object that you're going to be modifying. So let me CLS to clear the screen again. Type in DS mod space user, because this is a user account that we're going to modify, space, and in quotes, we need to put the distinguished name of the object that we want to modify. So I'm going to go ahead and put in T Houston, same user we've been looking at, or actually to put this in correctly, it would be CN equals T Houston, comma, OU equals NY users, comma, OU equals New York, comma, DC equals Globo Mantics, comma, DC equals local. So now we've specified that we want to make a modification. We said it's a user account. We've given the distinguished name of the user account. Now we need to go ahead and put in an actual attribute to be modified. So let's go ahead and put in a dash office space, and then in quotes, we're going to put in New York. Why? Because, well, Tommy works in the New York office. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And if I've done this correctly, aha, I did, DS mod succeeded. Now to validate this, let me come back over here into Active Directory. And if I go into Tommy's account, you'll notice that for the office field, it now says New York. So let's go ahead and cancel out of there. That's how you can modify an attribute from the command prompt. Now let's go back to the command prompt. And this time, let's put in ds get. I'll hit enter here. It brings up the help. Scroll back up. Again, ds get. You got to say the type. It tells you what it's going to do. Let me clear this screen out. Let's type in ds get space user space, and again, we're going to have to put in that same distinguished name. So we got to put CN equals T Houston, comma, OU equals NY users. Can you see how using the command prompt can be, well, quite tedious? It's very easy to make a typo. Okay, even as I'm going through, I shouldn't be talking to you while I'm doing this because I'm bound to mess up. I've done it many times where especially with something like Global Mantics, it's a long name, type it wrong, or with New York users or New York, missing the space. Okay, this is the kind of stuff you mostly want to use with what? What is the command prompt good for? It's good for scripting. Okay, once you get the command written once correctly, you can copy and paste it many times and affect a lot of different objects. So anyway, here we go. We have dsget user, and then put in the LDAP distinguished name of the user. And then we need to go ahead and say, well, what attribute do we want to get? So I'm going to put dash office. And if I type this all correctly and hit enter, look at that. It tells me that the office is New York. Okay, so that's how you use ds get, is to go ahead and if you want to see an attribute. So really all we did was the equivalent of double-clicking on the object and seeing this attribute right here. Okay, that's what dsget did. Now, let's take a look at dsquery. If I type in dsquery, and again, I got to put in user, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get a list of objects based upon certain search criteria. So let's put in dash name space, and in quotes, I'm going to put in star Smith, end quote. What this should do is this should go ahead and return to us a list of users whose name ends with Smith. And if I hit enter, you'll see here that it gives me back the distinguished name J Smith, A Smith, and S Smith, all who exist in New York users, in New York, globalmantics.local. Okay, so that's what the querying does. And there's a lot of different queries you can do. But you want to see something really cool, you can use these all together to go ahead and make changes to a bunch of accounts. If I do that same ds query and then do what's called the pipe. Move my cursor here so you can see what I typed. I typed the pipe symbol, and then after the pipe symbol, we put in dsmod to modify user accounts dash office is New York. What we're doing is we're saying we want you to query everybody whose name ends with Smith, and we're going to modify all those users to say that they're in the New York office. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be a very realistic query. Why it is that everyone named Smith is in New York, well, that doesn't make sense, but I just want to demonstrate how this can work. I'm going to hit enter, and you'll see that dsmod succeeded 3 times. If I were to come back over here, and let's see, we had J Smith, A Smith, and S Smith. So let's come back over here to Active Directory, cancel out of here. And let's go to, let's see, S Smith. Let's see who that is. S Smith, there we go. If I go into Sherry Smith's account here, look at that. Sherry Smith is part of the New York office. And also, just to make sure that there's no trickery, let me go to Santiago Polanco here, and you'll see Santiago doesn't have an office entry. Okay, so there's a lot of little nifty things that you can do with dsmod, dsget, and dsquery when using them all together. Now, let's go talk a little bit about group management. All right, when it comes to managing groups, there's a few different things that we're going to look at. First of all, when we created our first group in a previous lesson, we saw that there were some selections that we needed to make. We needed to make a selection for group type and a selection for group scope. So we're going to talk about what those are. I'm also going to talk to you about a group management strategy. And actually, there's a number of different strategies that you can use, and we're going to talk about those. And then I'm going to go ahead and show you how to modify group membership, which is probably the number one thing that you'll be doing when it comes to actual group management. Okay, and then the last thing I'll show you is how to copy group membership. So if you know you have a user who is a member of X number of groups, and you have another user and you want them to also suddenly become a member of all those exact same identical groups, well, we saw how one way we can do it is by copying the user account. But what if both user accounts already exist? Well, I'm going to show you another way to copy over that group membership. So first, we have to select a group type. When we create a group, we have to select a type. And there are 2 different types of groups: security groups and distribution groups. Security groups, which, by the way, are the type of group that we're going to talk about for the rest of this course. Once we're done with this one slide here, everything else in this course, we're going to be talking about security groups. And the reason why is because these are the types of groups that are considered to be security principals. They have their own SID, security identifier. What does this mean? It means they can be assigned permissions, and that's why we even have groups, for the purposes of assigning permissions. Now, they can also be email enabled, but I want you to hold that thought for just a moment, because you might be thinking to yourself, well, what does that mean, email enabled? Well, that's explained when we talk about the other group type, which is distribution groups. Distribution groups are there for the sole purpose of working with your email applications, or to be more specific, Exchange. Okay, Microsoft Exchange Server is an Active Directory integrated application. It's not to say that other email applications aren't Active Directory integrated, but primarily Exchange is the Microsoft product that would relate most closely with Active Directory. It is not a security principal. And what does that mean? It does not have a SID, it doesn't have a security identifier, and it cannot be assigned permissions. Distribution groups are for the sole purpose of creating email distribution lists. Okay, if you've ever emailed within your company to a certain, let's say, department name, and then everybody in that department gets the email, that's a distribution list. Those are created with distribution type groups. Now, if we go back to security groups for just a moment, when we say that they can also be emailed enabled, a security group can also, if you have a situation where it's like, well, I have all these people and I want them to be a member of a group called sales because they're all in the sales department for security reasons, right? For permissions, for giving access or restricting access to and from resources. Well, you may also say to yourself, well, gosh, I want to go ahead and be able to email the sales group as well. Then you can go ahead and you can email enable that group. Now, I can't show you this because I don't have Exchange installed, but if we had Exchange installed, you can also make a security group a distribution list by email enabling it. Now, the other selection we needed to make when creating a group is the group scope. And we had three choices. We had domain local, global, and universal. Domain local groups, first of all, are part of a domain, meaning where is that group stored and where is it replicated? Well, it's something that is part of the domain. Who can its members be? The members of a domain local group can be users and computers. Okay, you'll notice that for all three group scopes, whether it be domain local, global, or universal, users and computers, that's primarily who your members, who you're trying, that's the whole purpose in creating groups. Okay, so but besides users and computers, global groups can be a member of a domain local group. Universal groups can be a member of domain local groups. And other domain local groups can be what's called nested into domain local groups. Now, what can a domain local group be a member of? Well, only other domain local groups. Okay, I know this is going to be a little bit confusing here because it's like, wait, members, member of. Yeah, it's kind of confusing. Just try to stick with it here. Other groups, all these other types of groups can be a member of a domain local group, but a domain local group can only be a member of another domain local group. A global group is also something that is created within a domain and is part of the domain and is replicated within the domain. Users and computers can be members of global groups as well as other global groups. Okay, you cannot have a domain local group be a member of a global group, nor can you have a universal group be a member of a global group. What can a global group be a member of? Domain local groups, other global groups, and also universal groups. Now, at this point, I'm going to bet you're very confused, and that's okay. Stay confused right now. Just take what I'm saying for what it is. When I go into the actual group management strategy, this will make more sense. When I get to the interface, this should make more sense. So just to wrap this part up, what is a universal group? Well, universal group, although it is created and technically stored in a certain domain, okay, it can be any domain in the forest, it is actually part of the forest, and it is replicated throughout the forest. For this reason, it is actually good common practice to create your universal groups in your forest root domain. Not a requirement, just a good common practice. Now, who can be the member of a universal group? Users, computers, global groups, and then other universal groups. You can actually have universal group nesting. Domain local groups cannot be a member of a universal group. Who can a universal group be a member of, or what can a universal group be a member of? Domain local groups or nested into other universal groups. Now, like I said, I'm sure this is all very confusing, and let me see if I can clear some of this up by talking about group management strategy. And then we'll try to further clear it up when we go into the interface right after this and see what this all looks like. Because you might be thinking to yourself, what the heck? Why do we have all these different scopes? And what does this scope really mean? Well, see, each scope, domain, local, global, and universal, kind of has its own purpose. And I will tell you that these purposes are very often only because, well, to some extent, because Microsoft says so. Okay, in real world, the stuff I'm about to talk to you about is not very often practiced. I'm not saying you shouldn't practice it. I'm just telling you it tends to not be used. Okay, so basically what I want to talk to you about here are a number of group management strategies ranging from something called AGDLP down through AGGUDLP. Now, what do these letters all stand for? Well, let's start simple. AGDLP stands for user accounts being put into global groups. Okay, so this would be kind of your single domain environment. In a single domain environment, you're going to have user accounts, which are going to be made to be members of global groups. Global groups are designed for the purpose of gathering users with similar needs. So we're going to go ahead and, as a for instance, create a global group we'll say called sales. And the user accounts that are in the sales department would be made a member of the global group called sales, or maybe sales users. Then the global group becomes a member of a domain local group. Now, the purpose of the domain local group, and again, this is very typically according to Microsoft, because in the real world, you might just assign permissions to the sales users group and be done with it. But the domain local group is for the actual assigning of permissions, the actual access to resources. So you might create a domain local group called sales documents read only, or maybe sales documents full control. Okay, it's just a name. And the reason it's just a name is because it's only a name until you actually assign the permissions to the domain local group. So that's actually how this works. User accounts get put into global group accounts. Global group accounts get put into domain local group accounts. And then permissions get assigned to the domain local group accounts. We could further this strategy with something called AGG-DLP, which is where we use global group nesting. This is where maybe let's use accounting instead of sales. Accounting, we might further break down into accounts payable and accounts receivable. So we have users who work in accounts payable, and they're part of a global group called accounts payable. We have user accounts who are part of accounts receivable, and they're put into a global group called accounts receivable. And those two global groups are then made a member of another global group called accounting, or all accounting users, or whatever you want to refer to it as. And then you have a domain local group, which again might be called accounting documents access, or accounting documents full control, or whatever you want to name it. And then you assign the appropriate permissions to that domain local group. Another group management strategy, if we want to get beyond the single domain environment, now we're in a multi-domain forest, is in each domain, we have user accounts who might be a member of the sales department in that domain. And so in the respective domain, user accounts are made to be the member of a global group in that domain called sales, or sales users, or maybe such and such domain sales users. We then create a universal group within the forest called all sales users. And we take each of the global groups from each of the individual domains, and we make those global groups a member of the universal group in the forest for all sales users. We then go back to the domain where we might have some resources for the sales documents. We create a domain local group called Chicago Domain Sales Documents Read Only. Okay, I'm just making up names here. And we take the universal group, and we make it a member of that domain local group, and then we assign permissions. And the very bottom one we have here, AGGUDLP, it's basically a combination of taking the AGGDLP strategy, but moving it into the forest. If we were to do our accounting scenario, we would say in each domain in our multi-domain forest, we'd go ahead and take members of accounts payable, put them into accounts payable for that domain. We take members of accounts receivable, put them into accounts receivable for that domain. Take those accounts receivable and accounts payable global groups, nest them into the accountants, we could say domain accountants global group within each domain. Take each of those global groups, put them into a universal group in the forest called all accountants in the company, whatever we want to call it. We create a domain local group in the individual domain where the resources are. We then assign we make the universal group a member of that domain local. We then assign permissions to the domain local group. This is not something you have to do. This is something that Microsoft recommends to have a very organized group management strategy. Are you starting to understand why this is not practiced very often in the real world? I will tell you from firsthand experience, this is a great set of strategies if you can consistently do them across the board at all times throughout your entire Active Directory infrastructure. The problem is when you have multiple IT administrators, each having their own way of doing things, and as soon as you have one who doesn't follow this strategy gets to be crazy and very difficult to follow. All right, let's leave all of that confusing stuff. Let's pop back over to the operating system real quick here so I can show you how to do stuff like actually making users members of certain groups or changing that group membership. And I'm going to show you there are different ways to do this. Okay, so here we are back on our Windows 7 client. We're still looking at Active Directory users and computers. And here, if I highlight New York groups, you'll see that we have our sales security group that we created in a previous lesson. If I double click on it, it takes me into the properties for this group. And here's what we can see. We can see that it is a security group as far as the choices between security and distribution. And it is a global group. Now, real fast before we go any further, I just want to show you that if you want to change the scope or type, you can. All you have to do is just click the other button. Now, it's not very common that I can't think of any reason that you would ever change from security to distribution or from distribution. I could see why you would change from distribution to security. See, security to distribution doesn't make any sense because you just email enable the group and you've essentially made it a distribution group. If you had a distribution list and you decided, you know what, this would make for a good security group, then you may make it a security group and then email enable it so that you still have your distribution list. But what I really want to talk to you about is the group scope. You'll notice that you can, once you're a global group, you can become a universal group just by clicking on it. But you cannot go to domain local. That's grayed out. Okay, you cannot go directly from global to domain local. But guess what? If you're a universal group, you can go to either. So let me click apply. Now you'll notice since we are a universal group, now domain local is a choice. I can switch back to global or I could switch to domain local. But as a domain local, if I click apply, now global is grayed out. So you can't switch directly between domain local and global, but you can make the switch. You just have to go via universal. So again, I apply to universal, go to global, hit apply. Now I'm a global group again. All right, what else do we want to look at? Well, here I have two different tabs that I really want to focus on. Members and member of. Now you may recall that when we looked at user accounts, there's the member of tab. That shows what groups you're a member of. And same thing holds true here with a group set of properties. A global group can be the member of other groups. So there is a member of tab. And if I click on it, you'll notice it's not currently the member of any other group. If I want to, I could say, well, anybody who's a member of the sales group is also a member of, and this is kind of ridiculous, you wouldn't do this, but we could say the sales group is also a member of the domain admins group. And guess what? That means that any user who is a member of the sales group is also now a member of the domain admins group. Okay? Now, the members tab is where you can see the members of this group. And you may recall that we made Tommy Houston a member of the sales group, so we see him there. Now, let's talk about modifying group membership. There are three main ways, actually there's really four main ways to do this. One would be from the group side. Okay, from the group side, here I'm looking at the sales group. If I want to add additional members, I just go to the members tab and click add. Let's put A Carp. That should be enough. Check names. There we go. A Carpenter. Click OK. We've now added Angela Carpenter to the sales group. Now, that's one way you can modify group membership. Another way is to do it from the user side. Okay, I could go to Amanda Cole here, go into Amanda's properties, go to the Member Of tab, and add sales. Okay, you can see here that this user is a member of sales. I can go back to Angela Carpenter. By the way, see that she's in sales. Or I can come over here to sales and see that we've now added another user to its membership. The third way we can do this is, let me come over here to the users. We can go ahead and we can right-click on a user. So let's pick one. Let's say Anthony McCarty. Can right-click and say Add to Group. And then go ahead and put in sales. And it says that this operation was successfully completed. And sure enough, if I come back over here to groups and members, okay, we have another one. And what's really cool about that last way that I just showed you is, let's say I want to take a whole bunch of users. I'm going to use the control key just to highlight 4 users here. Right click on any of them, add to group, put in sales, check names, click OK. It was successful, and sure enough, if I come over here to groups, members, you'll see we got a bunch of them. Now there is a 5th way to do it, and I'm not going to go in and actually demonstrate this, but just using the overall logic that I've already taught you, you could use the dsmod command to go ahead and modify an attribute. And when you're modifying an attribute, well, you might modify the members attribute of a group, or you might modify the member of attribute of a user account. Okay? But there is one thing I will show you at the command prompt. Let me go ahead and cancel out of here. You know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the sales group and go to members. And let's go ahead and highlight all of them. I held down the shift key to highlight everything and remove. Okay, I removed all those members. So sales no longer has any members. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to the command prompt. And I'm going to do something very interesting. I'm going to do a DS query. I'm going to actually hit up arrow because this is the same query we just did a little while ago. But instead of taking all the users with the last name of Smith and then going ahead and adding the office attribute of New York to them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say dsmod group. Okay, I'm going to modify a group. And of course, now I got to put in CN equals sales. That's the name of the group, comma, OU equals, in this case, it's not New York users like we're used to putting in. It's New York groups, comma, OU equals New York, comma, DC equals Globomantics, comma, DC equals local. Okay, so we're modifying a group. And what we're going to do specifically when modifying that group is I'm going to put space dash add MBR. So add a member. So what should work here is I should do a query of all users with the last name Smith, or whose name ends in Smith. And then I'm going to pipe that into a dsmod command to say those are all the users that we're going to add as a member of the sales group. Now let's see if this works. I'm going to hit enter. dsmod succeeded. Come back over here to Active Directory. Go into the sales group members and look at that. 3 users are now a member of the sales group. Pretty cool, huh? Now there's one other thing I want to show you here when it comes to groups, and that is, let me come over here to users, and I believe if I remember correctly, let me go down here to Tommy Houston and go to the Member Of tab. You'll see that Tommy Houston is a member of domain admins and domain users. And we're going to add sales back into that. Okay, we're going to add sales back in. So Tommy is the member of these three groups. Thomas Harper, on the other hand, you'll notice is only a member of domain users. Let me go ahead and cancel out of here. We're going to come back over here to the command prompt. And I'm going to type in ds-get user. And what I need to do here is I need to put in Tommy Houston. Okay, so common name is T Houston, comma, OU equals NY users, comma, OU equals New York, comma, DC equals Globomantics, comma, DC equals local. Okay, so I'm getting from Tommy Houston, member of. Okay, I want to get what groups Tommy's the member of. Now, if I hit enter, you'll see here that it shows me the groups that Tommy Houston is a member of: sales, domain admins, domain users. But let's take this a step further. We're going to get this, and then we're going to pipe this over to a dsmod command. We're going to modify group add member. And now we're going to put in cn equals, get this, T Harper, comma, OU equals NY users, comma, OU equals New York, comma, DC equals Globomantics, comma, DC equals local, end quotes. And here's what should be happening. We're going to take this list, and it's what's going to be filled in as to the groups that we're going to add this member. So if I did this correctly, let me hit enter. Well, dsmod succeeded twice, third time failed. You know why it failed the third time? Because Thomas Harper was already a member of domain users, so there's no reason to make that modification. But what did happen was a success, what we wanted. If I now come back over here and go into the properties for Thomas Harper and go to the member of tab, Thomas Harper is now a member of all the same groups as Tommy Houston. So we have successfully copied one user's group membership over to another's with that command line entry. All right. So that's pretty much what there is when it comes to group management. Let's take a quick look at computer management, and then we'll wrap up this lesson. Now, when it comes to managing computers, there's not a lot to it. Yeah, we'll look. Computer has some attributes. But I mostly want to talk to you about something called pre-staging computer accounts. And then, of course, let's review joining a computer to the domain. And basically, it's as simple as this. What is pre-staging computer accounts? I actually spoke to you about this briefly in a previous lesson when we talked about creating computer accounts. See, computer accounts can be created at the same time as joining the domain, but the problem is that those computer accounts will always be created in the default computers container. If you want them to be created in another location, then you create the computer account before joining the domain. Some other advantages to pre-staging computer accounts is when it comes to automatic deployment. Okay, if you're going to automate the deployment of a lot of computers, so if you're going to do mass automated deployment of, let's say, Windows 7 down to a bunch of client computers, when it comes to that mass deployment, very often there are reasons that you may need to have the computer accounts created before that deployment takes place. That's another reason for pre-staging computer accounts. What I can tell you is this. The term pre-staging, all that means is that you create the account in the Active Directory database before an actual computer exists, or at least before that computer joins the domain. Now, speaking of joining a computer to the domain, we've already seen how to do this in a previous lesson. What I want to tell you is that basically, in order for to get real literal here, in order for a computer to join a domain, a computer object must exist in the domain. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, whoa, wait a minute, Ed. You just told me that the computer account can be created at the same time you're joining the domain. Yes, it can. But what technically happens is that the computer account is created first as part of that process, and then the computer is joined to the domain. So what this means is when you are joining the computer to the domain, if the account has not been pre-staged, the user who is attempting to join the computer to the domain must have privileges to be able to create the computer object. Plus, that user would then also have to have privileges on the individual local computer to be able to change domain membership. So I want you to keep that in mind. And that in itself, by the way, is a reason for pre-staging computer accounts. If you want users to have the ability to join the domain, but not have the privilege of creating computer accounts in the domain, well then you as an administrator go ahead and create the computer accounts first. Then the user can go ahead and join the domain, and all they would need then is administrative privileges to the local machine. And that's not that uncommon to have users with administrative level type privileges on the local computer. All right, let's go in and just take a real quick look at computer accounts. All right, so back here on our Windows 7 client, as you can see, apparently I left Thomas Harper's properties sheet still open, so let me go ahead and cancel out of here. And then let's go ahead and jump over to the New York Computers container, because I want to remind you that we had 3 different computer accounts. Okay, that's what we've created so far. New York Client 1 Win 7 was created originally when we installed that Windows 7 client computer. That's the one we're actually on right now. And when we joined the domain. And you may recall that where this account showed up, let me go ahead and move it. See, I just drag and drop. It was created over here in the built-in computers container. But we didn't like that, so what we did was we went ahead and moved it over to the New York Computers container. Then what I did, and let me go ahead and refresh this so they're in order. There we go. Then what I did was in the previous lesson, we created 2 more client computers called New York Client 2 and New York Client 3. Now I will tell you, these computers don't actually exist. This is what's called pre-staging the computer account. If I were to now go ahead and build another Windows 7 client computer and call that computer New York CLI 2 Win 7, and then go to join the domain, it would go ahead and join, and this computer account would go ahead and associate itself to that actual computer. Now, one other thing that I want to tell you about these computer accounts is that, remember, computers also have a username and password, but that username and password is automatically communicated as part of joining the domain. Okay, so that's part of what that association to the computer account is. And it is rotated. It is actually updated on both the client and the server on a regular basis. Now, what can happen because of that is if one end gets an updated, has the password updated, and the other end does not, you may find that you're not able to log into the domain. What you need to do at that point is you would need to go to the client. You would need to disjoin from the domain, which, just to give you the super fast explanation of how you do that, click on Start, right-click on Computer Properties, takes you into the System Control Panel. Down here, we're going to change settings. Click Change, and right now we're a member of globalmantics.local. I would switch that down to a work group and give the work group a name. Click OK. It would involve a reboot, and we would no longer be part of the domain. I'm not going to do that. I just wanted to show you real fast how you would do that. After you disjoin from the domain, you would come over here to the actual computer account. You would right-click and you would reset the account. When you reset the account, that tells this computer account you are no longer associated with any physical computer. And that is what allows you to then rejoin the domain, and when you rejoin the domain, it will reassociate to the computer account. The computer name and password will then all be synced up. Okay? So, that is definitely something that you want to keep in mind. That does happen in the real world. Now let's go into this computer's properties. You'll see here there's not a whole lot to the property sheets. And there's also not a whole lot for you to really do a whole lot of updating. Now here you'll see the name of the actual computer account, its full DNS name, it's a workstation or server. Okay, don't worry about that stuff. It's all populated for you. Here's where you can put in the site that it belongs to, which we're not going to worry about sites right now. There's another lesson coming up where we'll talk about that. You can give a description of the computer. Here's where you can see what operating system it's running. And again, you don't really populate it. It's already done for you. The member of tab, because yes, computers can be the member of a group. There are certain circumstances where computers are going to get permissions by being a member of a certain group. Delegation. This is where you can go ahead and get into some security, kind of an advanced security related setting that has to do with, you'll see here, certain services being able to act on behalf of another. We're not going to get into that. That's a whole another can of worms. Here we can do the location attribute, which I'll tell you what, the location attribute I'm going to talk about in the next lesson when we talk about printers. Because the location attribute is a great way to go ahead and find computers based upon where it's physically located. Okay, now you'll notice there's really nothing I can do here right now. The browse button is grayed out because, well, I haven't set up location tracking or anything like that yet. So don't worry about how location works because you'll learn about that in the next lesson. But this is where you would go ahead and add it in. And then the Manage By tab, which is where you can go ahead and say this computer account is managed by a certain individual user. And this can come in real handy if something happens to a computer account and you want to know who to contact based upon who manages that particular computer. For the most part, here's what I can tell you. We don't do any of that. For the most part, you do a little bit of it, but for the most part, computer attributes, not much you're going to do. They kind of set themselves and you're on your way. All right, so that's pretty much all there is when it comes to managing computer accounts. Let's go ahead and wrap things up and see what we've learned in this lesson. In this lesson, well, we've learned a lot of stuff. This was a pretty long lesson. I appreciate you bearing with me. But what did we cover? Well, we covered how to move objects, and we saw that there are three main ways to move an object, either drag and drop, through the context menu where you right-click and select to move the object, or from the command prompt. Also, we learned that when you move an object, you may affect how that object is managed from a delegation of control or more specifically group policy, stuff that we're going to learn about later. We talked about how to delete objects. Again, we can highlight an object and hit delete on the keyboard. We can go to the context menu if we right click on it and select delete, or we can use DSRM, the command line, to go ahead and delete an object. And the main thing there to keep in mind is that once you delete an object, you cannot recreate an object with the same name and expect it to be the same object. Then we went in and saw all kinds of stuff on how to manage users, ranging from resetting passwords to unlocking the account to enabling and disabling. There's all sorts of different attributes to look at. Okay, we looked at everything there is when it comes to managing users. We also talked about managing groups. Not only our group types and scopes, but then we got into the whole group management strategies. AGDLP, ranging all the way through to AGGUDLP. And technically there's even a more advanced one, which is AGGUUDLP, which is where you nest universal groups into other universal groups, and it can just get crazy. But we saw most specifically, probably the most important part I really want you to focus on there. If you were confused by all of that stuff, just stay focused on how to modify group membership. That's the thing you're going to be doing most often. And then we wrap things up by talking a little bit about managing computer accounts, which primarily has to do with the concept of joining a domain and or if we want to pre-stage our computer accounts before we actually join the domain. All right. Well, I think you've had enough. That was a long one. You might need a break. If you need one, go take one. I give you permission. And when you're done with that, I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.